This is BTV World. I am Syed Shabahat Ali, and you're watching Fault Lines. Afghanistan once again got attention from entire world media. This time, an attack in Afghanistan's capital, Kabul, was the point of attention. Apparently, there were Chinese guests staying in this hotel where the attack took place. The attackers, 3 in number, were all 3 killed. The attack continued for an hour. And later, Taliban forces attacked on the attackers and killed them. In the last 4 months, 3 diplomatic missions have been attacked. The first was Russian, that lost a handful of diplomats in the attack. And then Pakistan's ambassador was attacked by a sniper. And this third attack has taken place despite the fact that Ambassador Wang Yu had met officials of Taliban administration a day before this attack and had warned them that the Chinese might be attacked inside Kabul. What is happening? Why ISIS-K or ISIS Khorasan is trying to destabilize Afghanistan? Why is it trying to target all the external forces that are willingly available to rebuild Afghanistan? Team Fault Lines have prepared a package. Watch the package before I bring my guests to the program.
Pakistan has always affirmed its resolve to peaceful, stable, prosperous and connected Afghanistan for sake of regional stability. Afghanistan is gripped by new security threats and deteriorating security situation of the country is jeopardizing regional peace and stability. A string of Daesh attacks on foreigners in Kabul over the past 4 months shows the group's efforts to target international interest in Afghanistan. The Chinese-run hotel and residential complex in central Kabul came under an hours-long attack when 3 gunmen entered the multi-story building. At least 3 assailants were killed and another 21 people wounded, including 2 foreigners. A regional affiliate of Daesh known as Islamic State Khorasan province claimed responsibility for the assault. Since September, the group has claimed a number of similar attacks targeting Russian, Pakistani and Chinese diplomats and civilians in the Afghan capital. The resurgence of militancy in Pakistan raises grave concern, and interim Afghan government has to honor commitments on security issues to garner international support, which the people of Afghanistan need desperately against the backdrop of humanitarian and economic crisis. The people and security forces of Pakistan have rendered immense sacrifices for the elimination of terrorism and are still committed to punish these criminals for spilling the blood of Pakistani people.
Ladies and gentlemen, to talk about this subject, my first guest in the program is my guest in studio, Syed Muhammad Ali, who is a famous expert of international relations and frequently appears on my show. Ali, I welcome you to my show.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And from Canada, I am joined by Lucas Weber, who is co-founder and editor of militant.org and is working closely covering all the militant activities in this part of the world. Lucas, I welcome you to my show. Lucas, first things first. So let's talk about what Daesh is trying to accomplish here in Afghanistan, because this is 3rd consecutive attack that is targeting foreigners that are working inside the country.
Yes, well, the Islamic State's anti-China rhetoric can be traced back to the initial formation of the so-called caliphate in Iraq and Syria. The appointed caliph Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, in his very first speech, he criticized China for and accused them of torturing and degrading Muslims in East Turkestan. And during the organization's height, they actually attracted a notable Uyghur contingent and produced propaganda directly focused at China. However, as territory in the Middle East, the caliphate territory was rolled back by the international coalition. This group became more locally focused and regionally focused. However, ISKP, Islamic State Khorasan, which operates in Afghanistan and Pakistan, has been talking about China since at least 2015, and especially since the Taliban took power in August 2021. They've increasingly criticized China for its domestic and foreign policy, as well as the Taliban's relationship with China and Pakistan's relationship with China. So essentially, uh, prior to the attack, the hostile anti-China rhetoric has been building, and their justification has been the accusing China of oppressing Uyghurs, um, portraying China as an expansionist power that's increasing its footprint in the Islamic world, especially in Pakistan and Afghanistan. So they kind of view them as an imperialist colonial power that's subjugating Islamic countries. And the attack is kind of purposed to attack China itself, but also undermine the Taliban and reduce international confidence in the Taliban's ability to provide security in Afghanistan and disrupt their quest for international legitimacy.
Lucas, I fully understand that there is an anti-Chinese propaganda going on, not only in circles of the militant organizations, but also running in many Western media outlets. But here in this specific case, this is third time when a diplomatic mission has been attacked. I mean, let's recall that the Russian embassy was also attacked by ISIK, and then there was an attack, a live attempt on Pakistan's ambassador as well, which apparently looks to be an effort to isolate Taliban from all the international community that wants to help them out.
Yes, and we can also see with the April and May rocket attacks against Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, this was an attempt to another attempt to undermine the Taliban and expose it as incapable of protecting its own borders. Now, these attacks in Kabul, when we look at the attack on the Russian embassy, the Pakistani embassy, now the attack targeting Chinese nationals at the hotel, which they explicitly stated in their propaganda following the attack that they were intentionally targeting Chinese nationals. ISKP's strategy in hitting these international targets is to keep the Taliban weak, or at least appearing weak. So anything they want to disrupt and undermine, anything that would strengthen the Taliban's governing position. They understand that the Taliban is facing a dire humanitarian crisis, deep economic troubles, and the Taliban leans heavily on, or else they're trying to lean heavily on China to attract foreign investment and foreign aid. These are things that the Islamic State Khorasan branch would like to disrupt to keep the Taliban as a struggling government and trying to consolidate control over the country and strengthen its position.
Do you believe ISIK has the capacity to confront Taliban one-on-one, I mean head-to-head, because ISIK does not have strong footholds in any particular region. They are just playing hide and seek with Taliban, and Taliban have a heavy presence to the length and breadth of the country. So do you believe they have the capacity, or else they will just keep doing the damage without having capacity to take the leadership away from Taliban?
Well, the Islamic State Khorasan province has shifted its strategy away from trying to control territory into forming small cells scattered throughout to conduct hit and run attacks, ambushes, basically wage guerrilla warfare and conduct urban terrorist attacks. So this is something that we can derive from the recent Pledge of Allegiance photos that were released, pledging the Islamic State Khorasan's allegiance to the new Islamic State leader. You could see that compared to, say, the Nigerian branch, which showed off all of its weaponry. They had tens or hundreds of militants in their photos. They had heavy armor, large weaponry, just unbelievable firepower and manpower depth and strategic depth. We can see a contrast in strategy with the Islamic State Khorasan's branch. So they're in smaller cells. They're looking to, pester the Taliban with hit and run attacks, and also use these small cells to hit international targets, which tend to bring lots of media attention and elevate the branch's status amongst Islamic State leadership and the global Islamic State support network that we've been tracking online for through Militant Wire. So this is the kind of small scale approach that they're taking, and it seems like they're hoping that eventually space will open up. Perhaps certain regions will become restive.
Point taken, Lucas. Thank you very much for being guest in my program today.
Having me.
Coming back to you, Ali. So, what do you expect Taliban's response to be? Because certainly this is an effort to sabotage whatever efforts Taliban are doing to seek any international recognition, and if they are seeking the recognition that we're talking about.
I think that's a very important question, because for three reasons, I think Afghan Taliban have an incentive to build the international trust, legitimacy and credibility that they have been looking for by effectively countering a global threat of Daesh in their territory. They have economic challenges, they have political issues, and they also have human rights issue concerns that they need to address, particularly regarding the international community. And I think their struggle against Daesh provides them a useful opportunity, because not only for their own survival as a government, but also as a political reality that exercises support, stability and legitimacy in Afghan territory, they should carry out effective operations against Daesh. But the challenge that they face is at a strategic level and also political level. At the strategic level, because some of those factions and individuals who are not happy and have broken away from the Afghan Taliban have joined Daesh. So they understand the thinking, the culture, the planning, so that is a challenge for them. Secondly, because of the economic problems that the Afghan Taliban face, because of the lack of international diplomatic recognition, they are constrained in their ability to mount a decisive and successful struggle against Daesh. And I think it is also up to the international community, because when they expect Afghan Taliban to bring peace, stability and security in Afghan territory and ensure that no part of Afghan territory is used against any other country, including Pakistan, including Iran, including China, including Central Asia, then obviously their concerns and constraints have to be recognized. And although we expect them to deliver and live up to their commitments, particularly Pakistan as well, and we are really upset and angry somewhat at their inability to ensure that Afghan territory is not used against Pakistan. But in their struggle against Daesh, I think it is useful that if they are provided economic relief,
Ali, if I can cut you
help them.
If I can cut you here, you just mentioned three very important points. Let's focus on the political issue that you just underlined. Don't you believe that Taliban have not been able to create a cohesive national government? That many fighters in the Taliban faction were also expecting to be integrated into the larger national unison, and despite the other reasons that you have just highlighted, don't you believe, or for the other reasons that you have highlighted, don't you believe that they have started to become fairly unpopular in Afghanistan? That is another challenge that they are facing at the moment.
That's the second dimension of the reason that they are finding it, very difficult to meet the international expectations, to become popular socially and politically, and also to successfully, strategically and militarily isolate and eliminate Daesh, because they are economically constrained, because they are politically constrained, and since they have not, unfortunately, so far actually managed to develop a comprehensive and inclusive political government that enjoys the trust and respect across ethnic and ideological lines, it also constrains their ability to eliminate Daesh support base in those territories where they do not have enough influence and control. However, at the strategic level, they have opportunities, and I hope in future they will be more successful. Why I am hopeful is for two reasons. One, as our earlier guest also mentioned, Daesh has a different ideology, Daesh has a different agenda, and Daesh has a different strategy and tactics as well. When they claim to develop a sort of a caliphate in this region, they expect popular support in a territory over which they expect some sort of legitimacy, and they have not been able to build a larger popular support base for cultural, ideological and historical reasons. And I thankfully do not expect Daesh, as they also failed, let me remind you, in Syria as well, despite their very destructive militant capabilities, but they could not translate their militancy into legitimacy and popularity. And the anti-Daesh alliance was quite successful in reducing their influence and effectiveness, which is why after 2015 some of the Daesh elements moved, who fled from Middle East towards Afghanistan. But they are cultural, there are strong cultural, ideological, linguistic, ethnic and strategic reasons why I doubt they will be able to enjoy the space that they are hoping for. And I think in due course, for their own interest, the current Afghan government has an incentive and a compulsion to and an imperative to defeat them successfully.
But while you talk about Afghan government, it has catastrophically failed on many ends. And one of the ends is the expectations of Pakistan. Now, Pakistan is a country that has hosted back-to-back two OICs just to facilitate Afghanistan. I mean, it was at the heart of the agenda. But still, what has happened in Chaman border twice in a week, doesn't it actually demonstrate their sheer incompetence to address the major issue that they should have addressed?
Absolutely, and there are three reasons for that. Number one, the reality is, notwithstanding what the international community, including Pakistan, expects them, that there should be a normal state which should do business with the region, with the countries, with the international communities like any other state. But at the end of the day, it was a militant organization which came to power. So to expect them to immediately transform themselves into a very effective government that can meet the expectation of their domestic people and also the region is somewhat, an optimistic expectation, if I may use the word. Secondly, when you expect a military sort of discipline, which you expect from a professional military, is also, I think, somewhat unlikely from that organization. It's not a professional army that a commander-in-chief orders something and everything falls in line at the unit level, at the platoon level, or the brigade level. It's a conglomerate, a coalition, an alliance of different groups, and they are loosely attached. It's not very strong, assertive, centralized command control system. And unfortunately, some of the Afghan factions have been benefiting from the sort of porous borders that we have with Afghanistan, Pakistan and Afghanistan. And after the sealing of the border, after the fencing of the border, a lot of these individuals who were benefiting from the smuggling have actually suffered. because their livelihood depended on smuggling of arms, of weapons, of fuel and other things, goods, drugs and everything, and they are really affected by it. So sometimes these individuals carry out some attacks, and then the government, unfortunately, their forces look the other way, and in that garb they try to move their things. But I think our annoyance has been conveyed at the highest level. Pakistan's leadership has also conveyed it, and I think Afghan government has also recognized that there are problems and they need to sort it out, because it is in their own incentive not only to ensure that they enjoy and exert the influence and credibility that their nation expects, but also those neighboring countries which expect to have good, stable relations with them. Otherwise, it will not be good for them internally or regionally.
Thank you very much, Ali, for saying this. And ladies and gentlemen, this conversation continues. We'll take a break and we'll join you back with the second segment of program. Stay with us. Welcome back. Ladies and gentlemen, the problems in and around India are so immense that we can do back-to-back many programs on this subject. Recently, the Indian military picked up again an skirmish with Chinese forces in the northern front. And again, it caused a lot of embarrassment to India, home and in home as well as abroad. Not only the Chinese forces responded it fiercely, but also there are some military preparations that China is doing in the north, which are also very concerning for India. India being a main ally partner of United States and NATO allies, I mean the countries that are in NATO allies, is considered to be a major military power that can, theoretically speaking, deter the Chinese threat that the United States feel lies here in this part of Asia. Fact of the matter is that since 2011, India has taken its defense budget from $49.6 billion US dollars to $76.6 billion US dollars, and that is a lot of growth. But amid all of this, many are of the view that all of the preparations made by Indian military against China are only optics. Fact of the matter is that India only tries to gain the economic benefit of being a partner of the West without causing much of harm to China. Team Fault Lines have prepared a package. Watch the package before I bring my guest to this part of my program.
India yet again failed to maintain healthy and stable development relations with China owing to Hindutva-inspired belligerent regional designs. Indian and Chinese troops have clashed on their disputed Himalayan border, the first known incident between the two nuclear-armed countries in nearly 2 years. In a statement, India's Ministry of Defense said soldiers from both sides sustained minor injuries in the face-off, which took place in Tawang sector in Arunachal Pradesh, a remote, inhospitable region that borders southern China. The 2,100-mile-long disputed border has long been the source of friction between New Delhi and Beijing, with tensions escalating sharply in June 2020 when hand-to-hand fighting between the two sides resulted in the deaths of at least 20 Indian soldiers in Aksai Chin, Ladakh. China is yet to comment on the standoff, but China has made it clear periodically that the so-called status quo of April 2020 was made by India's illegal crossing of the border between China and India, and China cannot accept it. The Chinese side had also made it clear many times that the rights and wrongs of China-India border conflict are very clear, and the responsibility does not lie on the Chinese side. India, who have unrealistic fantasies about the border issue with China, is becoming a strategic liability by jeopardizing regional peace.
Ladies and gentlemen, to join me over the phone, my first guest in this segment is Dr. Ejaz Akram. He is Professor of World Politics in Southwestern University, Chengchong, China. Dr. Ejaz, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Doctor, ever since this Galwan incident has taken place, many things have changed with regards to India's defense preparations. India has instantly started shoring up alliances, started military exercises with a number of countries, but many are of the view that these are bare optics. It does not actually mean anything in practical terms. How do you see this development, sir?
It's a mixture of optics and an ideology that the Indian establishment espouses that is behind the willingness to take over China at the behest of the United States of America and other world powers. So it's a mixture of two things. As far as the ideology is concerned, I think that India is sincere in trying to maintain or spearhead its own hegemony in the area, in Central Asia, South Asia, Middle East as well. But in terms of capabilities, it severely lacks the potential to do America's dirty bidding in the Himalayan regions or taking on China, whether it's in the South China Sea or in the borderlands. So, in that, when it comes to real politics and when push comes to shove, and there is actually a hot war, like we had a couple of times, but a non-bullet hot war, which was, hand fight because of the nature of agreement these two countries have. We saw that China has plenty of resolve and the capacity to deter the Indian aggression, which comes at the behest of the United States, that you have to stop the Chinese development initiatives come what may.
And Dr. Shab, also the fact of the matter is that China is also not allowing the situation to ease. They have kept nerves very tight, and they have kept the people on the other side of border on their toes. They have not allowed diplomacy or any other means of engagement to overtake this sense of tension that prevails in this region. So do you believe that China is also enjoying the situation where India apparently looks helpless?
Well, China is certainly not enjoying it, because Chinese people are essentially first and foremost non-confrontational. But when things go beyond a certain thresholds, they have incredible amount of military preparedness and the will to go to war. In Wuhan summit, when Modi went there, that was his golden chance to build bridges with the Chinese. The Chinese were sincere in actually handing out the olive branch to the Indians, in addition to the Pakistanis, and made very, very lucrative offers as long as Indians would actually develop a common outlook of peace and development in the region. But whereas Indians went and did that, and Xi Jinping also came subsequently to India, but after that, the Indians succumbed and buckled under the American pressure. and then took a policy U-turn, not discursively, but in reality. So the Chinese caught on to that, and soon we saw Galwan Valley happened, and we saw that there was an offensive in Ladakh, and to much of detriment of India, and a lot of shame and embarrassment on the part of India that they lost so much territory. Now, the Chinese at this time in Arunachal Pradesh, they have zero trust of on Chinese that they would, on Indians that they would actually comply or talk peace. So they have this, they will take some areas, leave a couple of them, come back and take them again. Is because they have an ecosystem, a military ecosystem that they have developed, which is in a plateau. Indian military ecosystem is very poor or non-existent, and it is in a downward hilly path. So they have natural disadvantages. Plus, keep in mind that a lot of the populations of these regions are Tibetan and sub-Tibetan, mixed with Indians, but also Tibetan and sub-Tibetan. So you have these population also, they question India's legitimacy in the area, that why should we vouch for India, which has given us nothing, and look at just across on the other side of the border, the Chinese people are living so well. So there's a lot of natural advantages that are working for China, and India is at a grave disadvantage.
Dr. Shah, in the larger picture that we see, China is now building bridges with Kingdom of Saudi Arabia as well. And during the recent visit of Chinese President to KSA, $50 billion worth of agreements were signed between the two sides. The two sides are now also talking about doing the bilateral trade in RMB instead of USD. That might be just one of the major concerns for United States at the moment. Do you believe this is a serious development for US?
Yes, I certainly think that it is a very serious development for China, very serious development for Saudi Arabia, a very happy development for the rest of the world as well. Obviously, the Americans who are not very enlightened, in my opinion, they don't like it because they have a zero-sum worldview, and they don't like win-win cooperation. They just winner takes it all kind of a mentality, very backward, going back a few hundred years, a feudal mindset. So now the question is, what will happen? The Americans are not going to let this go just like that. There will be some backlashes, but the Americans are also running out of options on the table. So as far as responses that range from economic, developmental, and finance, Americans will be running out of options, but they have military options. And one of their biggest options is terrorism and coercing smaller powers, bludgeoning them into submission. This is one of the tactics that they use. They've used it in Pakistan, they've used it elsewhere in different countries and so forth. So the question is, will Saudi Arabia be able to, actually, does it have the wherewithal to militarily defend itself at the end of the day, whereas itself is occupied by so many American bases. So that's a bottom line. But before that, there are many other lines in which this political powwow will take place, and we will see that China, you will see, would actually standing resolutely behind the Saudis, and this may even usher détente between Saudi Arabia and Iran, which was somehow artificially propped up by the Americans and other regional powers, with a view to keep the Saudis scared and on our side. So I think that entire narrative and that whole script and the rule book and everything, I think it's crumbling down. People are not willing to buy that anymore.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ijaz Akram, for being guest in our program today.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, as you heard, Dr. Ijaz Akram, and like always, he has this very straightforward approach, always very generous to share his piece of wisdom with us. He's an expert of Chinese affairs. Coming back to you, Ali, and we are talking about the role of India, that India is trying to play the fake role of a hegemon that is not only trying to haunt smaller countries around, but also trying to take head-on challenges with China. I want your quick take on the recent statement given by Interior Minister of Pakistan, Rana Sanaullah Saab, who during a press talk actually highlighted the involvement of India in sponsoring terrorism in Pakistan. I would request my producer to play that shot before I take your comment on it.
जो है वो इंटरनेशनल कम्युनिटी के सामने इसको लाया जाएगा और इंडिया को जो है इसमें बेनकाब किया जाएगा, क्योंकि ये बिल्कुल वाज़ेह सबूत हैं कि इंडिया जो है ये बराह रास्त मुलव्वस है। और ये देखें कितनी बड़ी रकम जो है वो इस एक इवेंट को करने के लिए, एक वाक़े को करने के लिए।
India is involved directly in sponsoring terrorism inside Pakistan. Your quick take on it, sir.
Absolutely, and I think it is one more evidence that Pakistan has showcased not just through our Honorable Interior Minister, but also before the international community at the United Nations by our Foreign Minister, and I'm sure he'll also raise it with his counterparts in Washington. And but this is not an isolated case. Because when you look at the Indian strategic behavior, there are three key characteristics that they reflect. Number one, their thought is based on hatred towards the Muslims, suspicion of the West, and its own ambitions, which are far beyond its own capacity and strategic culture. And I see a ray of hope. Let me first give you my first perspective on this. I see a hope because its international community in general and the US strategic thinkers in particular are beginning to recognize the limits of Indian will as well as capacity towards the US larger geopolitical interests in this region, particularly regarding New Delhi's commitment in containment of China project. That is a ray of hope and a diplomatic space in which Pakistan's diplomacy is progressing, and I see a trend in the gradual and slow improvement in the relations between Washington and Islamabad as well, which is tantamount to, by the third visit of Foreign Minister to the US and also yesterday's visit of the US CENTCOM Commander-in-Chief and having his first meeting with the newly appointed Army Chief of Pakistan. So I see different institutions beginning to revive and repair the relations which were temporarily sort of overshadowed by the unrealistic expectations of US from the Indians.
Ali, we spoke about it in our last program when you appeared. As you spoke about Foreign Minister's statement perhaps thrice during this conversation, let me play the shot where Foreign Minister of Pakistan, Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, responded to a comment raised by a media person. Listen to this comment before I take the perspective from Ali on this.
I'd like to remind the Honourable Foreign Minister or the Minister for External Affairs of India that Osama bin Laden is dead, but the butcher of Gujarat lives, and he is the Prime Minister of India.
Ali, Osama is dead and the butcher of Gujarat lives and is Prime Minister of this country. He was not allowed to get into United States before he became the Prime Minister.
I must appreciate our Honorable Foreign Minister for exposing the true character and historical reality of India before the international community. Although it was shocking and disturbing for the Indians because they're always keen on showing their soft, sophisticated and responsible side before the international community and reserving their cruel and hatred-based approach towards minorities in the country or towards the smaller neighbors. But this is not an isolation, and I'll take just 1 minute of your time to share with your viewers. There are at least 10 dimensions of the Indian strategic behavior which is a reality that the international community must recognize, and our foreign policy and our diplomats and scholars and journalists must continuously expose before the international community. When you look at the Abbottabad incident, and then you had the Balakot incident in 2019, in which they carried out the most irresponsible misadventure despite the nuclearized environment, and it was retorted in the form of swift retort, and they were embarrassed before the international community. Then you come to the second action of the unilateral accession of IIO-JK in August 2019, and then you see the humanitarian situation in IIO-JK and also of the minorities. And then when you add it up with the Disinfo Lab, a 15-year-long project, a bipartisan project, not just of BJP, whether it's Congress or BJP, they have a bipartisan consensus of trying to harm Pakistan's international image. And then the support, what you just witnessed in case of for the terrorist elements in Pakistan, whether it is Daesh, whether it is TTP, whether it is BLA, Mr. Gulbashan Yadav, and now lastly the Johor Town incident, in which the Indian citizens are themselves involved. When you add it all up, and with their strategic ambitions of becoming a member of the United Nations Security Council, building up their large nuclear arsenal in which they are selling their uranium in the scrap yards, you add it up, what is the world looking at? The world is looking at the most dangerous and irresponsible member of the international community. And the sooner the international community realizes that the rise of India, the wealth of India, the power of India will not contribute to the peace, security and stability of the world, but will cause it more harm and instability than ever before. That is a responsibility that Pakistani Foreign Office is doing very well, but I think it needs to be reinforced by capable and knowledgeable anchors like yourself, our think tanks and media as well, so that India is not able to fool the international community anymore.
Thank you very much, Syed Muhammad Ali, for being guest in our program once again. And ladies and gentlemen, as he rightly said, I'll just repeat his words, what the international community is waiting for. All these evidences have been submitted by Pakistan's ambassador to the United Nations in form of a dossier to the Secretary General in the past as well. And Pakistan once again has offered to the entire international community to witness the anecdotal evidences that we have of the involvement of Indians in sponsoring terrorism and extremism. So if the fight on terror is actually fight on terror, let's fight India together. We'll join you next week with another program. And until then, Allah Hafiz.